My name is John Nichols, and I want to impeach the president and the vice president. I want to impeach them for lying to the Congress of the United States about the reasons for going to war. And I want to impeach them for lying to the people of this republic. And I want to remind them that the founders established a system of checks and balances that required that every war in which an American boy or girl fights must be declared by the Congress and sanctioned fully by the Congress. This war was not declared. This is an illegal and immoral war, and the lies that led us into it are an impeachable offense. I want to impeach them for spying on the American people in their homes. The revolution was fought with the purpose of giving citizens the freedom to live as they choose within their own homes. This simple freedom from the interruption of government in your daily life. There are those who say, oh, we got to get mad at Bush because he violated the FISA Act. FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It sounds like a footnote down at the bottom of your tax return. And have you done the FISA Act? I do not want to impeach them for violating the FISA Act. I want to impeach them for violating the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which says we are free in our homes from government interference. And I want to impeach him for sanctioning torture and extraordinary rendition. You know, there are those who say, well, it's very inappropriate for them to violate the Geneva Conventions. No, the Geneva Conventions are the law of the land. When we accept a treaty, when we enter into an international agreement, it becomes, according to our Constitution, the law of the land. But I'm not that worried about the Geneva Conventions. I respect them. I think they're honorable. I would hope that our country would always honor them. But I want to impeach the President of the United States because the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution of this country says that you cannot subject someone in the custody of this republic to cruel and unusual punishment. Torture and extraordinary rendition are cruel and unusual. The actions of this government in this regard are impeachable offenses. And I want to impeach them. I want to impeach them for what they did to Joe and Valerie Wilson. I think most of you know that Joe Wilson's an American hero. When there were hostages in Baghdad, in the first Iraq War, children being held by Saddam Hussein, Joe Wilson had the courage to confront Hussein and to free those hostages. He was thanked by George Bush's father for being one of the most courageous diplomats in the history of the Republic, a Raoul Wallenberg-like figure. And Joe Wilson was trusted to go to Niger and figure out whether this country faced any threat whatsoever from Iraq. And he went, and you know, I've been to that part of Africa. Nobody seeks out a fun-filled vacation in Niger. And he went over there, and he came back with the information, and he gave it quietly, without any rigor. He did his job, and he said, look, there is no threat here. This is bogus. There's no nuclear threat. Saddam Hussein, the Israelis blew up Saddam Hussein's nuclear capacity back in the early 1980s. It doesn't exist. And the UN inspectors, Scott Ritter, he'll tell you, it doesn't exist. And now I just went to Nigeria. I checked. They weren't going around trying to. It's not, the problem does not exist. And yet the President of the United States stood before the Congress of the United States and said, well, the problem does exist. Secretary of State of the United States said, better get active before we get a mushroom cloud. Dick Cheney said before the Veterans of Foreign Affairs, we know that Iraq is reconstituting its nuclear capacity and that they will soon pose a threat to their neighbors and to us, to the United States. They all lied. They lied. And when Joe Wilson said, as the war was turning bad, after they got George Bush out of the flight suit drag and they took down the mission accomplished sign, Joe Wilson wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. He said, I don't want to cause any trouble here, but I did tell these guys that there wasn't a nuclear threat, that this weapons of mass destruction thing wasn't real. And that's why they're not finding them. You see, many people back in the summer of 2003 were wondering, well, when are they going to find those weapons of mass destruction? I know we've been there for a while. We control the entire country. How come we haven't found the weapons? And so Joe Wilson writes, well, this is why we haven't found the weapons. They weren't there. In fact, they knew before we went in they weren't there. And so then Dick Cheney writes, they clipped the article out of the New York Times. Dick Cheney writes on the side of it, they got, this was submitted to Congress. They've got the note, in his handwriting. Got to go get this guy. We've got to do something about this guy. And so in the office of the Vice President of the United States, a sworn defender of the Constitution, sworn to keep true faith to the Constitution of the Republic, they used that office to destroy the career of the wife of a man they were mad at and to seek to destroy his reputation of an American hero, to destroy his reputation. The third article of impeachment against Richard Nixon, approved by the House Judiciary Committee, voted for by Democrats and Republicans, said that Richard Nixon should be removed from office because he used his office for political purposes to spy on and to harm his political critics. What Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby and George Bush did to Valerie Plame and Joe Wilson is an impeachable offense. Now, I know that you're going to say, God, this Nichols guy, I like him. I want to buy his book. I understand that it will make a fine holiday gift. But is he just charming? Is it just he who says these things, these amazing things that make me so happy and reassure me so about the possibility that America might be redeemed? And I wish that I could tell you that these are my concepts, that I, in my little room late at night when I cuddle up under the covers in Madison, Wisconsin, I think noble thoughts about the Republic. I wish I could tell you it, but my mother taught me not to lie. Well, actually, I was not born into the Bush family. And so I've got to tell you that these noble thoughts I express to you are those of our founders. Nothing I am saying to you would sound radical or unfamiliar to George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or James Madison. James Madison, the essential author of the Constitution of the United States, he was the guy who kept the notes at the Constitutional Convention. And you think, that's a cool job, right? Of all the things that you could get to do in life, say, yeah, well, we were founding a republic, and I kind of kept the outline of it, sort of put it together. James Madison said that it may perhaps on some occasion be found necessary to impeach the president himself. Do not fear this moment. It is what we fought for. It is what tells us that we are citizens, not subjects. At the Constitutional Convention, Madison worked hand in glove with George Mason. Now, I know in the current state of the Republic, many people are unaware that George Mason is not merely a basketball team. But George Mason was a Virginia farmer, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Imagine Donald Trump, who put his entire fortune at risk, literally provided the funding that made it possible to maintain the Revolutionary Army that defeated the most powerful army in the world, the army of the British Empire. And George Mason was at the Constitutional Convention. He added a little section to the Constitution called the Bill of Rights. What's that? I know, well, obviously we're not honoring him currently. But George Mason said, no point is of more importance than that the right of impeachment should be continued. It answers the eternal question, shall any man be above justice? And in the new American Republic, our answer shall be no. Be he citizen or president, he is equal in the face of the law. Impeachment tells us that we are the equal of a president of the United States. Mason said as well that if we do not maintain the right to impeach and use it when necessary, then all other rights in the Constitution will be invalidated. For if a president may act as a king for 4 years, what Jefferson referred to as an elected despot, if we allow that freedom to a president, then surely no other liberty is safe, because a king can remove any of your freedoms, and if you will not impeach a president acting as a king, then you have no freedoms. Right. But this is complicated stuff. I know the Republic's a complicated thing. When should we impeach? Well, that's hard to figure, isn't it? When should we impeach? Now. Well, here's a little concept. I'll throw this out to you.
6 years ago.
Yeah, 6 years. Yeah, maybe for stealing an election. Correct. But here's a little concept I'll throw out to you. And it's just practical. I don't know. You guys can disagree with me. But I'd say probably you don't impeach when you're in a time of perfect prosperity and peace. Unless somebody had oral sex. No. You know, you would probably, in a rational state, you would impeach when things aren't so good. Maybe when something's gone really awry. I don't know, maybe when, according to the latest Gallup poll, 80% of Americans believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. Let me repeat that figure, 80%. There are more Americans who believe that the moon was made out of green cheese than believe this country is headed in the right direction. Something has gone horribly awry. But when would you really get the sense of when you might want to impeach? Well, I don't know. Let's go back to the founders. What did they say? They said they wrote the Constitution with the primary purpose of chaining the dogs of war. That was their phrase, to chain the dogs of war. The point of the Constitution, above all else, was to keep the United States out of war. Why? James Madison said, war is the true wet nurse of executive aggrandizement. In a time of war, a president will use the supposed threat from beyond as an excuse to take away our liberties at home, as an excuse to alter our foreign policies and relations with the nations of the world, and an excuse to empty the public treasury into the accounts of his associates and family members. You know, I'm thinking to myself, you hear all this stuff about Nostradamus, right? You know, he used to, wow, you could imagine the future. And, you know, it strikes me that James Madison could imagine the future. But no, it wasn't that. It was that the founders knew the nature of men. We are imperfect beings. And they realized that if this republic they were creating was going to last for a long time, that it wouldn't always be Tom Jefferson's and James Madison's, not even John Quincy Adams's and Andrew Jackson's, that over time, the quality of those who would lead the republic would degenerate. And you would get a bad, you roll the dice in Vegas, it doesn't always come up for the right numbers, right? Sometimes you just get a bad break. You'd have a bad president. And so that's why in the Constitution of the United States there is no mention, read the document backwards, forwards, up and down, you find no mention of corporations. No mentions of business arrangements, how we would organize our economy. There's no mention of capitalism in the Constitution of the United States. They figured we could figure out how to do business. There's no mention of God in the Constitution of the United States. In the Bill of Rights attached to it after it was written, they said, well, don't mess with people's religion, let them do what they want, but just let's not get that, and let's keep that separate. Nice wall of separation, as Jefferson said. But no mention of God in the whole document. No mention of what faith, Catholic, Jewish, Islam, Hinduism. They'll tell you, you're going to figure out how to worship. There's no mention of Florida's primary on January 29th. In fact, and I know this is going to amaze you, there's no mention of New Hampshire's primary or the Iowa caucuses. There's no mention of any primaries or caucuses. There's no mention of conventions. There's no mention of political parties. There's no mention even of when or how you would elect the President of the United States. Do you know that for the first 40 years of the Republic, we didn't even hold elections in November? They figured we could actually figure out how to choose our leaders. But you know what is mentioned in the Constitution? There are 6 separate references in the Constitution of the United States to impeachment. And there's a reason for that. The founders knew we were resourceful people. We could figure out how to run the thing. They wanted us to know that we had not a right, but a responsibility to remove a leader who violated his or her oath to the Constitution of the Republic, not at the next election, because one day of violation of that oath was an assault on the Republic. And not at the next election, but at the next possible moment. They wanted you to know that it was not your opportunity or right to impeach. It was your duty to the Republic to impeach a lawless president. But republics go astray. Rome. Great countries fall apart, and you lose sight. You lose sight of the direction of the nation. But I want to tell you something. Through most of the history of this country, we didn't forget. We've been remarkably good about remembering this. The worst war that this country got into prior to the current war, and we've been involved in a few bad wars. The worst war we ever got involved in prior to this was the Mexican-American War of the 1840s. That war, lost to history, was a very important war because something was happening in America in the 1840s. Jews from Eastern Europe and Germany, and Catholics from Ireland and Italy, and Scandinavians from up in Norway and other places, they were coming to America, and they were settling in the big cities. And they weren't going down south and starting plantations anymore. And the balance of population in the country was swinging against the original sin of the American experiment, which was human bondage, slavery. And in the election of 1844, a slaveholder, James Polk, was elected president of the United States. And he conspired with the members of his administration to invade the sovereign nation of Mexico with the purpose of seizing its territories, dividing them into states. Mexico banned slavery. Already, they were ahead of us. Dividing its territory into states, and because those states were below the Mason-Dixon line, declaring them to be slave states, so that the majorities in Congress would forever be pro-slavery. An anti-war candidate was elected in the election of 1846 on a platform saying, I will go to Congress to hold this president to account. I will fight to end the war. I will stop the funding of this war, and I will censure or impeach this president for the crime of turning America into an imperial state. The Dennis Kucinich of his day. And this congressman went out and he did what he said. I know it's amazing, but occasionally they do. And he got out to Washington, and he was so tough on James K. Polk, working with his ally, the oldest member of Congress. This guy was a very young guy, a war vet. But his ally, the oldest member of Congress, John Quincy Adams, the former president of the United States, who had returned to Congress after his presidency for the purpose of fighting slavery. These two men worked to hold Polk to account. They spoke openly of censure and impeachment. They spoke openly of forcing him from office for the purpose of ending an illegal and immoral war. And his law partner, the young congressman's law partner, sent him a letter. And he said, my friend, you got to ease off on the president. You got to go easier. It's a time of war. Our troops are in the field. You cannot be so tough on the president. You got to wait till the war is done. You got to let him serve. We got to honor the presidency of the United States. And the young congressman wrote him back a letter. He said, my friend, the provision of the Constitution giving the war-making power to Congress was dictated, as I understand it, by the following reasons. Kings had always been involving and impoverishing their people in wars, pretending generally, if not always, that the good of the people was the object of the war. This, our constitutional convention understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions. And they resolved to frame the Constitution that no one man should ever again hold the power of bringing this oppression upon the American people. Your suggestion that we cannot challenge a president in a time of war, that we cannot go so far as to say that he should be removed from office for leading this country into an unnecessary war, destroys the whole matter of the American experiment and places our presidents where kings have always stood. I was not elected to serve a king. Sincerely, Abraham Lincoln. Now I know that there are a lot of people who will tell you that all of this is true. Everything this kid from Wisconsin's telling us is true. But, you know, it's late in the Bush presidency. He's almost done. So can't we just hold our breaths for 15 months and let this just go away? I mean, he's only got 15 more months. Why bother? Let's check out how is Britney Spears losing that extra weight? What is the status of OJ's criminal indictment? How's the presidential race going? You know, Florida going to vote in January, or what about that Iowa caucus? You know, can't we just pay attention to something, anything else but the fate of the republic? And you know, I understand this desire to say it's too late. You know, whenever I'm pulled over for drunk driving, I always say, officer, it's after bar time. We don't prosecute when it's this late at night. And if I was a kid and I forgot my homework at school, and the teacher got upset, I'd say, no, you don't understand. I was late to school today, so there are no sanctions, right? Because it's late. I'm late, so late's okay. Everything's all right. The rules don't apply when it gets too late. The republic doesn't stand if it's late. Let me tell you a little bit about time and time frames. Every 10 minutes in Iraq, an Iraqi civilian is killed in a war that George Bush says will not end for so long as he occupies the Oval Office of the United States. Every 10 hours in Iraq, an American soldier is killed in a war that George Bush says will not end for so long as he is the President of the United States. Every 10 days, $2 billion removed from the U.S. Treasury and placed in the accounts of Halliburton and Blackwater and all of the other war profiteers that are getting rich off the misery of Iraq and America by a government that will continue to remove those amounts or more every 10 days for so long as George Bush is the president of the United States. So there are those who say 15 months is not enough time. It's too late to hold George Bush to account. I answered their 15 months with 10 minutes, 10 hours, and 10 days. And I ask this question: is it too late for the Iraqi mother who will bury her child before this speech is done? Is it too late for the American mother who will bury her child before this night is done? Is it too late for the dead of New Orleans and for those who die each day without health care coverage in this country, for the children denied adequate food, housing, and education in this country each day? Is it too late? Is it too late? Is it too late to hold those who would lie and corrupt and, yes, destroy the promise of the American experiment to account? Is it too late to impeach George Bush? No. Is it too late to impeach Dick Cheney? No. Is it too late to restore the rule of law and to assert that James Madison and George Mason and Abraham Lincoln were right, that the revolution was about assuring that this republic would never have a king? I've come to South Florida to tell you this. In the words of Patrick Henry, another of the founders, I know not what you will do, but I know the decision that I have made. And the decision that I have made is this: until January 20th, 2009, it will not be too late for me to say that I do not have a right, I have a responsibility to seek the impeachment and the removal of George Bush and Dick Cheney from office, to seek the restoration of our republic, and to say once more that this is a nation under law, not a nation of cruel and crude men who would warp its promise and its future. I have a responsibility to stand before you and say that I will not let this moment pass without rising and speaking the truth of the genius of impeachment. And that is that this is the tool given we, the people, to redeem our republic. And a man who does not use the tool given him, a woman who does not use the tool given her to build, to grow, to redeem, to make possible, has surrendered their place not merely in the American experiment, but in the human experiment. Our humanity demands that we impeach the President and the Vice President of the United States. Thank you very much.